Have you ever been told that you are biased whenever you try and defend your position or try to examine someone else's? And maybe when you're told that you're biased, maybe you get offended. Maybe you think that it's an insult. Maybe you think that the fact that you are biased could mean that you're not quite as intelligent as someone who's not biased. Well, those of us who have grown up, especially those of us who have grown up in public education, have been conditioned to think that we can somehow remove our examination of a position or a truth claim from our preconceived notions. And I get told that I'm biased a lot. It happens all the time. And you know what? I stand as guilty as charged. I am biased. I mean, I am a dogmatist, even. I will go as far to say that I am full of dogma. My worldview that I have, I'm so sure of it, and I am so stubborn about it. Yeah, it's just true, and I'm not going to deny that. I don't, and really, you shouldn't deny it either. All of us are dogmatists, and I'm going to tell you why we are all dogmatists in this video. Everyone has to start somewhere when they think. And the starting place is called an axiom. An axiom is a point that cannot be demonstrated that you begin whatever you're thinking or building a logical system. Mathematics has axioms, logic has axioms. Worldviews have axioms. And the reason why we must start somewhere is because we don't know everything. And if we don't know everything, when we begin to try and construct our philosophical system, we have to start somewhere. There's a finite point that we must start at. And that is an axiom. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they don't have axioms. They'll say, well, I don't really have a starting point. I just look at the evidence. And that's just baloney. I mean, just total nonsense. When someone says that, I just question if they're really thinking about what they're saying. You know, really, let's say that you have a race. Let's say, like a NASCAR race. If you don't start the race, can you finish it? No, because you never began the race. And it's that way with thinking. As Gordon Clark pointed out, if you have not started, you haven't begun. If you have a conclusion that you've drawn, you had to get there somehow. Either that or you're just begging the question because you're just saying it's true because it's true. But isn't there some prior proposition that you believed that made you draw that conclusion? Greg Bonson said, there are two things you need to know about neutrality. One, they aren't. And two, you shouldn't be. As those of us who profess belief in Messiah Yeshua, the Bible ought to be our starting point. And the reason why it ought to be our starting point is because God has given it to us, and God knows all things, and He can't lie. Numbers 23:19, Titus 1:2, God can't lie. And I will expound on how that works in future videos. But as Christians, or even as Messianic believers, that's where we start at, is the Bible. We all agree that that's where we should start because that's what God has given to us to let us know who He is and what He wants from us. And that's where we start. And I'll have some atheists that will tell me that, well, axioms have to be self-evidently true. But that's kind of tautological. It's kind of meaningless. And the reason why that's meaningless is if something is self-evidently true, that means that it somehow validates itself. And if it validates itself, it's arguing in a circle. They're begging the question. It's a logical fallacy. So in order to maintain that position, they actually have to reject the rules of inference and logic, the way that we reason. So, every time someone says that, they're just not thinking about what they're saying. And I think a lot of it is ignorance. I think just a lot of it, they maybe haven't really fully reflected on that yet. Some people may just be dishonest. I don't want to presume their intentions. But the fact of the matter is, we all have to start somewhere in our thinking. So, if someone ever tells you that you're biased, or that you're dogmatic, or you're a dogmatist, just say, yeah, so are you. And then just tell them they have a starting point too, and if they don't say that they don't have a starting point, just ask, how did you come to that conclusion? And then maybe the wheels will start turning, and you could show them, say, hey, in order to say that, either you're just assuming it, which would make that your axiom, or you have something that got you there. And then there's something before that got you that proposition, and then something before that got you that proposition, all the way back until you find the assumption. It's pretty easy to point out. I just don't think a lot of people want to think that they're biased. But there's really nothing wrong with being biased. I mean, when you look at the history of philosophy, when you look at all the things, a lot of these philosophers, like Immanuel Kant, who tried to save empiricism from the criticisms of David Hume, they all had a goal in mind when they started doing philosophy. So really, philosophy is not just a dialogue of ideas. It's trying to get to the conclusion you want to get to. That's what a lot of people do. Whenever, let's say you have a debate, William Lane Craig versus like someone else like Alex Rosenberg, or another prominent atheist, right? Both of those men, when they debated, they got on stage, and you think either one of them just intended to say, "I'm just going to put all my assumptions aside, and I'm just going to talk about the issue of whether or not there is a God"? Do you think either one of them thought that? No, they both came with the goal of showing that their position was the correct one. That's what debates are for. We're trying to show that each of our respective positions are correct. So this idea that we're not biased and that we shouldn't have any ulterior motive in our dialogue about what we believe is just nonsensical. It's just demonstrably not true. In order to hold that we don't have actions, you actually have to reject logic, because that means you'll either affirm begging the question, or you'll have an infinite regress of ideas, and that itself is self-contradictory, because you can't get an actual infinity in retrospect whenever you're in the confines of time, or in the confines of someone that does not live forever. After all, if someone doesn't live forever, how could they have an infinite regress of ideas? They can't, because they're not around long enough to have it. And we, as people that are not omniscient, when we reason from one proposition to another. So there would be so it would take time for those ideas to play out, and an infinite amount of time is just something that we as mortals don't have. And to say that we somehow can have an infinite number of ideas that we have that would give us the answer that we're trying to argue for, it just ignores that that our days are numbered, and it's a logical contradiction, because you can't have a finite number of propositions that precede one another in the context of temporality, or in the context of time, and then argue that even though you're finite, you're still able to do that. Now, I haven't met anyone that does, but it's just to illustrate the point that an infinite regress of ideas just leads to self-contradiction, and therefore rejection of logic, if someone maintains that position. The same way, to say that you don't start somewhere is a logical contradiction, because you just said you don't start somewhere. Well, you either started there, or you started somewhere before them. You don't get to a conclusion without a starting point. So, in the end, we're all dogmatists. We're all biased. We need to make sure that we know that everyone's a dogmatist, and don't try. And anytime someone says that they're not a dogmatic, or that they're not biased, they're either not being honest, or they just don't know better. So that's all I have for this video. In the next video, I will talk about how we can tell which claims are true and which claims are not. God bless.